These guys seem more jacked up than usual.
Underrated. That's one of those words that gets tossed around too often in regards to video games, so I'm not going to use it to describe Days Gone.
Wait.
Another thing I hear way too much is, it gets better. That's rarely true in my experience, but if any game belongs in the it gets better category, it is absolutely Days Gone. Usually I find myself rushing the end of a game this long, ready to move on, even when I'm enjoying the final few hours. And this game is long. According to Steam, I spent over 50 hours riding the broken road, gassing up my steel steed, machine gunning freakers, and wondering, just where the hell is my dang wife? But even as I neared that 50-hour mark, I was more into the game than ever. I knew my time was coming to an end, and I found myself wishing, not necessarily for more game, but for the beginning of the game to have been better. The first act of Days Gone does a disservice to the rest of the game. It is slow and shambling. It is directionless and lacking in real stakes. But once it picks up, I found a game that I greatly enjoyed playing. I just had to put like 20 hours into a very mediocre opening, which is not okay. I can't help but wonder why developer Ben Studio put all the good stuff in the back half of this game.
Like that?
So in this video, I'm going to explain why the first half of Days Gone had me like, man, it's whatever, I guess. And the last half had me like, oh, hells yeah, boy. You see, in the end, I liked this game a lot, and it's one I've kept downloaded on my PC because I know I will be returning for more of the Endgame. I just don't know if I would ever want to start it over. And let me say now, there will be some spoilers because most of my issues are with the story. And I want to try to avoid vague criticism without examples. You know, as in, the characters were bad, there were scenes that didn't make sense, pacing was off. Like how? Be specific, bud. So you've been warned, some story spoilers are coming up throughout the rest of the video. And a second warning, well, maybe not a warning, but some context, because I know this game has diehard fans. And so I just want to say that yes, I am going to rant and criticize this game for several long minutes. But just remember, I like this game, and I am going to get to the positives eventually. Long story short, I do recommend this game. It's big and ambitious, a game that swings for the fences, and in some aspects, it really excels. It's just that it blunders pretty badly in other areas. It's a solid AAA game with some awesome ideas, but some extremely rough edges. Almost like you were given the finest, top quality deli ingredients, but the plate was then placed under a basketball hoop and you've been asked to build a club sandwich from the 3-point line. But I criticize it out of affection and a desire to see Ben's next project rise above Days Gone's shortcomings, because damn, this studio has got some juice and this game proves it. Now, whether that ends up being a sequel to Days Gone seems unlikely, but we will see. I personally would be pretty excited for a Days Gone 2. So yeah, look, I don't want to oversell the opening's issues. They are there, and they bothered me enough to bring them up, but it wasn't awful. I'm not a masochist. I'm not someone who forces themselves to finish a game. I drop games if there is nothing keeping me engaged, if I'm not having fun, especially long games like this. But I did have fun with the opening of Days Gone, riding around the world, encountering freakers and wolves and bears and bandits along ragged roads and wild woods was really engaging. I loved slowly working my way through dilapidated buildings to clear out freaker nests with homemade Molotovs and a rusty rifle. The immersive aspect of the world and combat systems, along with the promise of the Hordes, I figured just had to be looming on my horizon after just a couple more missions, pulled me through. Oh, how naive. But what held me up was the opening hours of the story and the way the story and mission systems felt so haphazardly attached to the overworld, as if they connected everything with scotch tape and spit.
That was a goner. Thank you, man. I thought it was over. Thank you.
I guess I'll come back here and finish burning.
Name's Deacon. They know who I am.
To tackle the second point first, cutscenes are constantly changing the time of day, or fading to black, or split between a 10-second walking sequence. Calls over the radio are interrupted by world events like gunfights or animal attacks, and rather than being paused until a later, more appropriate time, they get stuck on loop like a broken record trying to force their way through the smallest of gaps in the combat.
Okay, what were you saying?
Doesn't surprise me. He always seemed like the kind of man who'd attract her. Send out
So, what were you saying?
Ha! Doesn't surprise me. He always seemed like the kind of...
Okay, you were saying?
Ha! Doesn't surprise me.
I think if the player uses a weapon or an enemy NPC goes aggro on the player, then the radio should not be going off until like 30 seconds after a combat action has occurred. Overall, it feels as if the world's systems and the mission systems are crashing together rather than gelling together. And now we turn to the opening of the story itself. My main issue with the start of Days Gone is how apathetic the protagonist and player avatar, Deacon St. John, seems. And I get it. Deacon is 2 years into the apocalypse, zombies are everywhere, your wife Sarah is dead, and you are eking out a living by doing violent odd jobs for a conspiracy theorist and an old granny that has a work camp full of, basically, slaves. Oh, and your last friend in the world is badly wounded by cultists and reduced to a shivering mess in your shithole hideaway. That sucks. And I would be checked out too. It's actually a fine place to start a story. The first hour is spot on. It's just not a great place for the story to dwell, and dwell it does, because you are here for hours of gameplay. This wacky bastard and this cranky bitch give you random tasks that Deacon begrudgingly takes on because once Boozer gets better, you are going to head north. What's north? Never explained. It's just a new direction, I guess. Some motivation. And the thing is, it would be really easy to add some tension here. You are running back and forth, splitting your labor between the strongholds of a government-hating conspiracist and a former government employee who currently has slaves. There could be some stakes here. Things get a little more interesting when you spot and stalk a helicopter from the organization NERO, the US government's National Emergency Response Organization, tasked with trying to control the zombie, or freaker, outbreak. You meet up with O'Brien, a scientist who gives you hope that your dead wife may not be so dead after all. Now Deacon has a burning desire to find her. Okay, cool, now the story can start. Except, no, because not content with just being a painful, forced stealth section, the O'Brien mission becomes a waiting game, where you keep bumbling about the world, doing menial jobs, waiting for him to assign you multiple forced stealth sections. The lore regarding the freakers that you get from these missions is cool, but I would have preferred cutscenes or audio logs. Forced stealth has never been a good idea in open world games, and listening to exposition from deep inside a bush is like way down on my list of ways I want to experience exposition. Speaking of freaker lore, there is no way that would become the term for them. People would call them zombies. Even if they aren't technically zombies, that's what people would default to. If creatures from another planet landed on Earth, no one is going to be able to popularize outer spacers. It's going to be alien or extraterrestrial. For the freakers, I could see infected or mutated, but come on, people would just say zombie. It's like trying to rename centaurs just because their ass half is a little more deer-like. Anyway, freakers is a bad name not because it's a bad name, but because we already have a universally understood term for these things that people would use even if there were technical differences in behavior. Come on, you know what it is. It's in your head. In your head, zombie, 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 eh. Anyway, this is all mashed up with these flashbacks to your wife, and they are terrible flashbacks because they are so boring. And look, I don't mind romance. I watched 2005's Pride and Prejudice with my wife, and I didn't look at my phone all that much. The problem with the romantic flashbacks in Days Gone is that they are devoid of conflict. Scenes in a story should have conflict. This is just two people getting along, enjoying each other's company. That's great in real life, but it is really boring to watch in a story. Add some conflict, some subtext, some tension, give the scene stakes. Instead, it's just two people being nice to each other with interspersed exposition while you slowly stroll forward.
What would my mom say if she knew I was out on a midnight stroll in the middle of nowhere with an outlaw biker?
Well, I don't know. She'd say, honey, you better wear your sweater.
Very funny.
And there are a lot of these scenes. But in one, you get to pick flowers, so that's pretty cool. But once you finally get to Iron Mike's camp, after hours of story beats that are just dawdling, the story picks up. When you meet Ricky, Addy, Skizzo, and old Iron Mike himself, Suddenly, we have stakes. Characters have conflicting desires. They are motivated by wants and needs and fears. The plot is accelerating. Deacon is making choices and opening up to people. We got ourselves a stew, baby. The first maybe dozen hours of the game should have been reduced to like 2 or 3. Iron Mike's camp is where the story really takes off, and Bend would have better served the player by getting us here at a much brisker pace. There are still issues with the story. Connective tissue is thin and coincidental, like the leader of the cult that injured Boozer just so happens to be Jesse, a disgraced former member of your biker gang who has never been relevant until the reveal. What is the point of this? And why is zero attention given to the old biker gang? The mongrel MC that Deacon and Boozer still proudly rep never appears in flashbacks or anywhere. For a game partially inspired by Sons of Anarchy, there is not enough biker gang culture here, and I think that's a missed opportunity. How cool would a biker bar at the end of the world be? How about a flying V formation of leather-clad rival bikers pulling up on Deacon with a boombox blaring Skinnerd, or whatever bikers listen to? Maybe, Zombie. The story gets even better in the third section of the map, which finally opened up to me after probably 30 hours. You cross the mountains and find a militia and your not-so-dead wife. This is the best section of the game. The plot is moving much faster, the stakes are higher, the narrative feels more dangerous than ever, and Deacon feels somehow smaller in these heavily armed, sprawling military encampments. He is a fish moving to bigger and bigger ponds each time the map opens further, and by the third act you really feel that the odds are stacked against him. If the rest of the game had more closely resembled the last dozen hours, I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to say it might have resulted in not just a better video game, but also, out in the real world, a long-lasting peace on Earth. If only. Okay, now let's shift gears to the good stuff, because there is a lot of good stuff. I actually finished the game months ago and was left with such a mixed impression and so confused with how backloaded all the great stuff was that I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to talk about the game. I vacillated between a script of high praise and then a much harsher review, but in preparation for this I returned to the Endgame to ride the broken road, tackle a few more Hordes, and just immerse myself in the world of Days Gone, and damn it if I didn't get totally sunk in all over again. The systems that you encounter in the overworld are engrossing throughout the game, and were the threads that yanked me through the muddled story. Days Gone is at its best when you are left alone in its dangerous world, stalking through a landscape where you are both predator and prey. When the squawking radio falls silent and no one is asking you to do a fetch quest of picking lavender. When Days Gone lets you pick your path, the world comes to life. There is a minor survival game element to Days Gone. You need to scavenge through the ruins of our world, picking open the trunks of abandoned vehicles, and exploring the shadowy husks of small-town Oregon for health supplies, ammunition, and mechanical scrap for bike repair.
Nothing like scrap.
Your bike is limited in its range by fuel consumption, and you have to search the roadside for gas cans or pull into lifeless gas stations to keep your chopper topped off. I really enjoyed this aspect throughout my time with the game. It is survival light. You don't need to find food or water. You aren't over-encumbered with sustenance systems. As someone who likes the idea of survival games but usually finds the amount of inventory management required to be tedious, I really appreciated how Days Gone dips your toes into the survival system, giving you a taste that immerses you into Deacon's boots without becoming a chore that weighs you down. I absolutely loved finding the abandoned Nero bases, slowly picking my way through them, finding a cache of much needed supplies, disabling alarms that would bring a swarm of freakers down on my head, powering up generators to get inside for the injectors that upgraded Deacon's health, stamina, and focus. Days Gone features a wealth of real, impactful progression. You upgrade your bike with a larger gas tank, you get better handling, more durability, saddlebags stuffed with reserve ammunition, And with each addition, you feel more powerful, the bike feels more responsive, your sense of ownership grows. The same is true of Deacon himself. Character upgrades turn Deacon into a force of nature as he grows into the kind of badass that can take on the growing dangers of Days Gone's world. And the combat? Oh baby, the combat. Melee weapons are plentiful and pack a punch. You start with baseball bats and 2x4s, but after a while, you are crafting spiked bats and saw blade battle axes that would have Mad Max racing for the hills. On top of that, you have the guns. Crossbows, sniper rifles, sawed-off shotguns, SMGs, a Tommy gun, full auto machine guns with which to spew out a hellfire barrage of hot lead, silencers that let you close in for the kill like a ghost. And the gunplay itself feels great. There's weapon sway to the point that you need to stop moving, maybe even crouch for accuracy at range. That's a great hair raiser in a game where enemies will rush you, swarm you, take you to the ground. Plus, add in a dash of what the game calls focus, which operates like Red Dead Redemption's Deadeye, allowing you to slow time for precise shots or a bit of breathing room in dire situations. Whether you were facing infected wildlife, armed bandits, or the freakers themselves, the combat in Days Gone is excellent. I haven't even mentioned the explosives, the traps, both built by the player and found in the environment, that Days Gone can wow you with when the gameplay ramps up to full speed. Nor have I mentioned the Hordes, but to be fair, I'm taking my cue from the game itself, which hides the Hordes at the end of the game. You do encounter a few smaller hordes as you explore the opening section of the map, and they are tense fights due to Deacon being under-leveled. But compared to the power of both the Hordes and Deacon in the late game, it might as well be toddlers boxing. The Hordes are the standout feature of this game. They are eerie, fear-inducing encounters, even from a distance. Even when they are frozen in a huddled mass, groaning and hissing, the Horde feels dangerous. And once they are aggroed, when they come rushing at you, the game reaches its full potential. It's a shame that it takes so long to really get stuck into the meat of the Horde encounters. In a world where having 30 to 40% of players finish a game is cause for celebration, it's baffling to me that Sony Bend would hide the best mechanic in the game from most people. I think if Days Gone had been built more closely around the idea of Deacon as a Horde hunter, if the game had led players to the Horde fights much faster and much more directly, the game would have received wider recognition because it truly is fantastic design. The gameplay loop of clearing Hordes is top-notch and a gaming experience that will stick with me. Every issue I had with the story was overpowered by just how alluring riding the broken road turned out to be. I don't know what the future holds, but from most reports, Bend Studio has moved on, and it's likely that Days Gone stays gone, and we won't see a sequel, which is a shame, because I think a follow-up could have been a great step forward for Days Gone and the studio. But here's to hoping that whatever Bend does next can build off the experience gained in crafting an open world as engaging as Days Gone and deliver an even better next game. Despite my issues with the game, Days Gone set a high bar for them to surpass. It's available on Steam and PlayStation, and if you're okay with an uneven ride, I recommend it.